The Lord tonight directed me away from our study in Mark. Oh, by the way, before I forget, Brother Bill, Miss Carolyn, I got a question I forgot to ask you earlier. Just hang around just for a second afterwards, if you would. I know y'all like to get home quick and watch UFC fighting and all that, but if you can just give me a minute. I appreciate it. Thank you. All right. Psalm 13. Let's find Psalm 13, if you would. Psalm 13, this is not a message that I think I would ever preach on any night other than a Wednesday night. I wouldn't feel comfortable preaching it any other night. I'm not entirely comfortable with it tonight, to be honest with you. But I'm pretty confident that this is the message the Lord would have me to preach. And I think it's important sometimes. We've got to be careful. You know, the Bible does not prescribe that we confess our sins one to another. That's for the Holy Spirit. But James does tell us to confess our fault one to another. And I think within that thinking, that would also include our struggles, our difficulties. I think it's useful for us to be appropriately transparent with one another. And over the time of my ministry, both here and in Alabama, I have found that it has been helpful for me to be transparent with you, if for no other reason than this crazy idea that when you ascend to the pastorate, that you ascend above the normal struggles of life. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I confess to you that lately life has been a struggle. I'd say for more than a year there's been specific struggles that I have faced, and not just as a pastor, but just as a human being. There's been specific struggles. You know, so if maybe you've gone through a struggle for an extended period of time, you may think, you know, well, what's wrong with me, or where have I messed up, and that's a valid question. You better believe I've asked it. But the important thing is, don't feel alone. One of the devil's best tools is that of isolation. If he can get you thinking that your problems are different and worse, and you know, you're not like those other people, you've got much worse things to fix. That can be discouraging and disheartening, and the devil's very effective at doing that. If he can get you believing that you're more messed up than everybody else. You may be messed up, but you're not more messed up than everybody else, because we're all made of the same stuff. And I think even what's led to this message is just this past week has been especially trying, you know. And many of you have had your own trials, medical and otherwise. Well, let me just kind of give you a glimpse into my week. All right. You start with, you know, I'm having some issues with my health that are not life-threatening, but they're mighty annoying. You know what I'm saying? You know, they get in the way. And I'm having to navigate that. And by the way, none of this is about old poor preacher. Please, please, please don't think that that's what I'm fishing for, because I'm not. My hope is that maybe this resonates with you where you are, and some of the things you're going through, that you can see, man alive, other people go through these kind of things too, and there are Bible answers for them. See? So there's that. And then my grandmother passing, that's not anything that just probably all of us have been through, but at the same time, we were close. And many say that she and I share a lot of personality traits, which I don't know how to take that. You know? And I'm sad, and I miss her already, but if I'm candid with you, I'm having a hard time feeling bad for her. I am mildly concerned she may be the first person thrown out of heaven. But while there's joy, there's not happiness there. I am happy for her to a degree. And then last night, I'm the coach of the girls' basketball team, and I'll just be candid with you, they got thumped pretty good. So what do? I look inward. I say, you're the worst coach ever to walk on the court. And then the devil latches onto that and says, by the way, that's not the only thing you're the worst at. You're the worst coach. You're the worst preacher. You're the worst pastor. You're the worst husband. You're the worst dad. You're the worst. And it just goes right on down the line. Now maybe you've never had times like that, but I'm going to tell you, the devil has a way of making you think you're the worst at everything. And you just kind of go down that rabbit hole. And then I get up this morning and yet again, the aforementioned annoying health things, and it keeps me from doing my job and all of that. And I'm like, good night. And then as if all of that wasn't bad enough, the Washington Redskins are now the Washington Commanders. What in the world is that? And their uniforms are horrific. So that was just kind of the capstone of a bad week. So are they still your favorite team? No. I don't know who those people are. Are you going to find a new NFL team? No. I'm kind of done with it. There's a certain liberty in that. So, Job said that man's days are few and full of sorrow. Sometimes it feels like that, doesn't it? Yeah. But we come to Psalm 13. And if I were to summarize it, I don't think that I could summarize it, Brother Hensley, better than somebody that we mutually admire, Graham Scroggie. He summarized this psalm from sighing to singing. From sighing to singing. Can I give you some thoughts about Psalm 13 before we actually get into it? Psalm 13, to the chief musician, a psalm of David. David has been running from Saul for years now. He's been in the same situation day after day after day, and in this situation, he's frankly made some dumb decisions. But he's at a point now in his life where he is stretched absolutely to the limit. We have this idea that David, this great giant of the faith, this man after God's own heart, that David just stands astride his problems and is just this marble icon of fortitude. That is not so. He is stretched to the absolute limit, and his mindset is, God, I can't go another day like this. I can't go another moment like this. I am finished. That's it. You ever been there? But what do we hear all the time? God can use a failure, but he won't use a quitter. And then I walk through the halls of our precious school, and what do I see everywhere? Honor God, do your best, never quit. It's everywhere. A constant reminder of our mantra. But I like what John Phillips said regarding this psalm. Man's extremity is just God's opportunity. Man's extremity is just God's opportunity. When God stretches us or allows circumstances to stretch us, all he's doing is positioning us to see him do something magnificent. Hard to see that sometimes. You see, before God deals with our problems, he begins with our person. It's been said that before he deals with the storms around us, many times he starts with the storms within us. Because it does very little good to fix our circumstances if we're not first made to handle the next ones. It's a short psalm. It's only 6 verses. It's been said that brevity is born of urgency. By the way, there's something to be said for these short prayers. Sometimes we get in our heads that we've got to be like John Wesley, who wrote in his journal, I feel unprepared for the day. I only spent 6 hours in prayer this morning. To John Wesley, I say, good for you, John Wesley, but you were riding a horse everywhere, and sometimes you had 6 hours. But I know where he's coming from because I many times felt ill-prepared for the day. I can't believe you just, John Wesley. He's not Jesus. He had long hair, so there. I do have high regard for John Wesley. I probably shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. It was a distraction, a needless one. But David's been running from Saul for years. And he's just done. You ever just been done? I'm just done. That's such a common phrase. Even my 3-year-old has said it. I'm done. Done with what, son? Just done. I expect he's heard one of us say it. So that's the setup. That's the setting here. So we begin in verse 1. David says, how long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long shall mine enemy be exalted over me? Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Lighten mine eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest mine enemies say, I have prevailed against him, and those that trouble me rejoice when I am moved. But I have trusted in thy mercy. My heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. I will sing unto the Lord, because he hath dealt bountifully with me. If the Lord will help me, I want to speak to you on this subject tonight, the Psalm of the Weary Believer. The Psalm of the Weary Believer. Now, let me say again, this is not meant to, oh, Pastor, listen, what I'm going through, I am sure, is less than what many of you have gone through and perhaps are going through right now. I'm not at all trying to elicit your pity. In fact, I'm on the upswing. I'm starting to go back up again. This is a psalm for people that maybe find themselves down there, and if you don't, you might be coming up on it. See, it's been said that all of us, when it comes to trouble, are either heading out of it or heading into it. Very seldom do we find ourselves without it. So let's speak on the subject of the Psalm of the Weary Believer. Father, help us. Help me. I'm keenly aware of my insufficiency for this task and my unworthiness for it. But Lord, you've so ordained that this is my opportunity, and I pray I'd make the most of it and please you in doing so. Help us, I pray. Speak to our hearts. Be with that believer that may be weary tonight. Encourage them and strengthen them and help them. For Jesus' sake, we ask these things. May we lift him up. Amen. The Psalm of the Weary Believer. We begin, first of all, with unanswered prayers. You ever been praying about something, and you just don't think God's listening? And if he is, he doesn't seem inclined to do anything. Well, that's what we see in these first 2 verses. How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long shall mine enemy be exalted over me? I think one of the real disservices that we independent Baptist preachers have done over the years is tried to shame our people anytime they find themselves in this kind of a state. When we try to present ourselves as these statues of godliness that never question, that never ask. Listen, I'm not saying that should be our normal procedure and that we should live there. But every person who's made of this stuff will find themselves there from time to time. David, the man after God's own heart, the man mentioned in Hebrews 11 in the Hall of Faith, briefly, but he's there. David had these seasons and had these moments and had these trials and had these difficulties. And if David's been there, I can't hardly expect that I won't be from time to time, nor should you expect that you won't be there from time to time. And I'm glad that God doesn't look down on me the way some other fundamentalists do when I find myself in these places. We see, first of all, we see in these unanswered prayers, we see an unfounded mindset. An unfounded mindset. Verse number 1 says, how long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? Has God forgotten you? No. Of course not. It's an unfounded mindset, isn't it? He hasn't forgotten us. It goes on to say, wilt thou hide thy face from me? He's not hiding anything from you. He's not hiding anything from me. But we get into this and we start entertaining an unfounded mindset. We start thinking in ways that are not scriptural. God doesn't love me. Well, I think he proved otherwise when he sent his son. And by the way, he's not obliged to do anything for us, and certainly nothing beyond that, to tell us that he loves us. But there's not just an unfounded mindset. There's some unfortunate masters. David is being ruled by two masters that he shouldn't. Verse number 2, how long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? I like that phrase, how long shall I take counsel in my soul? Who's his counselor? Himself. Can I tell you, frequently I'm a very poor counselor for myself. What does that mean? He's being ruled by the master that is his emotions. He's being ruled by his emotions. But you know what else he's being ruled by? He's being ruled by his enemies. How long shall mine enemy be exalted over me? We're talking about the results, the fruit of unanswered prayers, an unfounded mindset, and unfortunate masters. I want you to see something here. This is very interesting. At least it was to me. With this idea of unanswered prayers, 4 times in these 2 verses you see, how long? How long? How long? How long? This is called a eretesis. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's how you spell it. How you pronounce it, I'm just not sure. It's either eretesis or erotesis. I'm going with eretesis, or eretesis, or eretesis, whichever. All right. erotesis. And this is what an eretesis is. It is asking a question without waiting for or expecting an answer. You ever done that? If you're a parent, you have. The best way I could illustrate this is when your mom or your dad says, what were you thinking? They're not looking for an answer, and they're not going to wait for one. They're just going to say it because that's what you say as a parent. What were you thinking? Well, don't talk to me. Well, you asked me a question. Really, the psalmist, when he says how long, he's not going to give God time to answer, and he's not really expecting an answer. He's just venting. Why is he venting? Because it seems like he's been praying the same thing over and over and over and over and over with no answer. You say, does God understand how that feels? I submit that he does. Would you remember that when Jesus came to this earth, he came in addition to his main purpose of seeking, saving that which was lost, he came that he might experience humanity. And there were times that he would pray, and God didn't answer. You say, wait a minute. Does that mean there was some break in his fellowship with God? Not for 1 second of his 33 and a half years did he ever have a break in fellowship with his Father, except when on the cross and God turned away from him, when he was bearing your sin and mine. You see, sometimes unanswered prayers isn't because of sin. We don't know why it is. We just know that God does all things well. But sometimes God remains silent. And Jesus experienced the silence of his Father. How do I know? Go to Mark chapter 14. Hold your place here. Go to Mark chapter 14. We're in Mark chapter 14, we'll start in verse 26. Mark 14, verse number 26. And when they had sung an hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. Now skip ahead to verse 32. And they came to a place which was named Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, Sit ye here while I shall pray. And he taketh with him Peter and James and John, and began to be sore amazed and to be very heavy. And he saith unto them, My soul is exceeding sorrowful unto death. Tarry ye here and watch. And he went forward a little and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, Abba, Father, all things are possible unto thee. Take away this cup from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but that what thou wilt. And he cometh and findeth them sleeping, and saith unto Peter, Simon, sleepest thou? Couldest thou not watch 1 hour? Watch ye and pray, lest ye enter into temptation. The spirit truly is ready, but the flesh is weak. Now look at verse 39. And again, he went away and prayed and spake the same words. Why? Because he got no answer the first time. So you say, well, I've been praying for the same thing over and over and over. He knows how you feel. Because even the very Son of God has had to pray the same thing over and again. Which doesn't make him sinful. And by the way, it doesn't necessarily make you sinful either. Sometimes the Father's silent. Hard, difficult, but sometimes silent. So we see unanswered prayers. And then that gives way to what I call unfiltered petitions. David is learning what we all should learn, and that's to stop trying to measure our prayer time and just be honest with God and just tell him what we need. You ever tried to impress God with your prayers? Well, I got to make sure and say the right thing, because God obviously can't read your mind. Now, I'm not saying to pray flippantly. I'm not saying to pray disrespectfully. But please, please, please stop trying to impress God with your prayers. As the old song says, Jesus on the main line, tell him what you want. Verse 3. Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Lighten mine eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest mine enemies say I have prevailed against him, and those that trouble me rejoice when I am moved. What's he praying for? He's praying, first of all, for strength. Lord, I need strength. If you're not going to take me from this situation, then I need strength to endure this situation. I need strength. Consider and hear me, O Lord my God, lighten mine eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. He is exhausted. He is weary, and his eyes are about to close, and he fears if they close fully, it will be for death. Have you ever been so troubled that you desperately needed rest? Even in sleep, you got no rest. Sometimes your body would shut down because that's what it does eventually, but you got no rest. And so your eyes are always heavy and you're always downcast, and you start thinking, man, if something doesn't change, I'm not just going to go crazy, I'm going to die. That's where David is. Lord, I need strength. And then in verse 4, he prays for something not knowing what he's praying for. What in the world do I mean? Sometimes we pray and we think we're praying for the right thing, and God says, I know what you're asking for, but I'm going to give you what you need. You don't even realize what you're asking me for. By the way, Romans 8 touches on this with the Holy Spirit. I think it's verses 26 and 27, that the Holy Spirit prays for us with groanings which cannot be uttered, because we don't know how we ought to pray. So he goes to the Father for us. Look what it says, verse 4. Lest mine enemies say, I have prevailed against him, and those that trouble me rejoice when I am moved. What in the world could this have to do with satisfaction? David doesn't realize it, but what he needs to be praying for is, Lord, help me to be satisfied with what you allow into my life, knowing that it's making me more like you. It says, once again, verse 4, lest mine enemies say, I have prevailed against him, and those that trouble me rejoice. It doesn't say if I am moved. It says when I am moved. Now, what are we looking at here? What are we talking about? David is conceding that there are times that my enemy is successful. There are times that he is successful in moving me from where I think I ought to be. There's times he is successful in transferring me from this place of what I think is relative blessing to this place of relative cursing. There are times when I am moved. And that's not always a bad thing. I read a story in preparation for this. It's so simple, it's so predictable and yet profound. There was a young man that grew up in a small town, and they had one of those places where all the older men would gather and sit on the porch. And among other things is they'd play checkers. My grandparents owned a place in what was called Guilford Heights, Virginia. It was outside of Claremont. You know where Claremont is? It's right next to Spring Grove. Everybody cool now? It was a little river community right across the James River from Williamsburg, 7 miles across the river from Williamsburg. And we'd go there frequently during the summer. I miss it terribly. I didn't realize then how refreshing and rejuvenating that little place was. Listen, it was a little cottage. Oh, my soul. Primitive now. It was heated by a wood stove. The water came straight from the river, and I doubt was very filtered. Had one bathroom for all of us cousins, all of us grandkids, and their families. We slept in sleeping bags out in the sunroom. I couldn't do it now, but I sure do miss it, because it was on a cliff overlooking the James River. And if you'll let me reminisce for just a second, 4th of July was one of my favorites because we could sit in the backyard at their cottage and look across the river, and the fireworks show in Williamsburg was fantastic. And we had the best seat in the house. Anyway, me and my granddaddy would go catfishing. He didn't believe in a boat. He didn't want to spend money on a boat. And he didn't believe in gathering bait either. That's what I was for. And I'd go out in the mornings and I'd dig in the silt and I'd find mussels that he would use. He'd pop open and use those for bait. Anyway, down in downtown Claremont was a general store. Even in my childhood, was still very much an old school general store. And they had old men that sat around all day long at that general store. And I remember one guy, he did this thing where he had this board on his knee and he had this little puppet kind of thing, and he bounced that thing and that thing would just dance. Weird. But when I was a kid, I was mesmerized by it. And they played checkers. And you'd go in and you'd get what you need. It was vastly overpriced, but, you know, it was either that or go all the way back to Hopewell. So you didn't do that. You know where Hopewell is, right? Something you do. All right. Anyway. Well, anyway, back to my story. Man, where did I go? This kid goes off to college, and for whatever reason, while he's in college, he decides he's going to take up playing checkers against his roommates, guys in his dorm, and that kind of thing. He got really, really good. And he came back completely convinced that he was the best checker player in that entire small town. But there was this one old gentleman that everybody just said, hey, that's your guy. If you're going to say that you're the best, you've got to beat him. So he's walking down the street one day, and this old fella's actually at home, and he's sitting on his front porch. And the guy had heard that this boy was kind of talking some stuff about, you know, he was going to challenge him and all that. And this fella said, hey, come on up. You want to play some checkers? Kid said, yeah, I do. Just him and the old man. So they set up the board. He gave him the first move, and the young man made his move, and they made a few moves. And then all of a sudden, that old man uncharacteristically made a mistake. He slid his checker in. What are you doing? He's thinking to himself, how can you claim to be the best? And took two just like that. Oh, guess I'm slipping. Moves another one. Man, what an idiot. Takes two more. This is going to be a breeze. Oh. All of a sudden, that old man said, click, 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 click. Took four. King me. What? Happened again. Click, 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 click. King me. It was done in a matter of minutes. You see, what that kid didn't understand is sometimes you've got to be willing to accept some losses in your life to position yourself for greater victories. Boy, that sounds televangelistly, doesn't it? But it's not, it's true. Sometimes we've got to be willing for God, whether God actively does it or lets other people do it, that God moves us in our life in what seems like a loss, in what seems like a difficulty, in what seems like a defeat. But what he's really doing is he is positioning us to where we can have a greater victory. What did the psalmist say? It was good for me that I was afflicted. Why? Because it drew him to the word, didn't it? It helped him understand the word better. It was good for me that I was afflicted. It was good for me that I had these losses. It was good for me that I had these defeats, because what they did is it opened me up for greater victories. What losses are you willing to accept? What losses am I willing to accept that I might be more like Jesus? See, the psalmist didn't even realize what he was praying for. But Lord, help me to have the satisfaction of knowing that even when I am moved, even in what I perceive as my losses, ultimately it's going to turn out better for me, right? We have, there's satisfaction, by the way. We have unanswered prayers that produce an unfounded mindset, unfortunate masters. We have unfiltered petitions, and then we have unnatural peace. Now, when I say unnatural, I don't mean it to sound negative, but the peace that we need as Christians is not natural. It's not. It is unnatural. In fact, we could say it is supernatural. Verses 1 through 4 is all negative. How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long wilt thou hide thy face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long shall mine enemy be exalted over me? Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Lighten mine eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest mine enemies say, I have prevailed against him, and those that trouble me rejoice when I am moved. But then look at verse 5. But in spite of all this, I have trusted in thy mercy. My heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. I will sing unto the Lord, because he hath dealt bountifully for me. Can I tell you that getting to that point is unnatural? It is not what our flesh wants to do. It is not what our mind wants to do. It is not what our old man wants to do. But it is absolutely what needs to happen. That unnatural peace. That peace that comes, first of all, from past delights. Those things that God has done for us that we can reach back to and say, but in spite of all this, I have trusted in thy mercy. It's been there before when I've needed it. My heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. If I don't have anything else, if Saul puts a javelin right through my heart, I still have his mercy. I still have his salvation. That's unnatural. But not only that, it results from a purposed decision. I have trusted in the mercy. My heart shall rejoice in thy salvation. Now here's the decision. I will sing unto the Lord. I am deciding that even though the circumstances don't seem to merit it, and even though I don't maybe feel like it, I will sing. That's a decision that Paul and Silas came to in Acts chapter 16, wasn't it? They're there in the Philippine prison. The Philippian prison. They have been beaten. They have been tortured. They have now been incarcerated in ways that are meant to extend their suffering. And at midnight, what are they doing? They're singing. I promise you they didn't feel like it. And I promise you the other prisoners are like, what is wrong with these idiots? But by and by, what happened, their testimony got through to those prisoners because when those doors swung open, nobody left. That's unnatural. I will sing unto the Lord because he hath dealt bountifully with me. When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged, thinking all is lost, what are you supposed to do? Count your many blessings. I confess that even today, I was down. I came here, put together some work for my classes to do in my absence, and went back home. And I laid down in the bed, trying to get my strength back and trying to get myself righted for tonight. Crystal was down in the kitchen doing something. Asher, still asleep. And as is his wont lately, he was asleep in my bed. It happens nearly every night. There's only been a couple of nights recently that it hasn't. He just, at some point in the night, and what's a little bit scary is my wife and I, neither one know exactly when this happens. I'd like to say that we're vigilant parents that notice when something's not quite right. Oh, no, he can get in, climb over top of us and get in the bed. And we don't know until we wake up and see him there. Terrible parents we are. And by the way, he will not sleep on the edge. He's got to wedge between the two of us. And then stretch out. My king-size bed might as well be a twin, because that's about how much room I get. But anyway, there he is laying in the middle of our bed, so I kind of nudge him over a little bit and I get back in. By the way, this is a rare thing. I don't want you to think I lay in bed all day, every day. I get back in, and I'm just kind of beating myself up a little bit. Man, you need to tough it out. You need to stick it out, man. You're not improving upon your reputation here. You know, I'm just working myself pretty good. And about that time, I feel this little hand reach over and start doing this, stroking my hair. Now, could it be that he thought I was his mother? Maybe. Likely. But that little hand reminded me God's been mighty good to me. See, they know. God's been mighty good to me. And if you'll be honest with yourself when you're in those difficult times, if you will honestly assess your life based on what God's done for you, you can't help but recognize how good God's been. Your flesh may not want to. Have you ever been so down that you didn't really want to think about the good? You wanted to be miffed. I lay there and I'm like, oh, God, forgive me. You've been so good to me. And he has. He's been good to you, too. He's been good to you. Because I tell you, and some of y'all have been through some frightfully difficult things and are going through some frightfully difficult things. But can I remind you, here's the absolute worst case scenario for us. Let's say we kick out tonight, go home, and that's it. I'm in heaven. That's the end game for all of us that are saved. That's every one of us that are saved. That's where this leads. I'm going to tell you something. In eternity, as the songwriter said, the things of earth grow strangely dim. And there comes a point, it's not immediate. I wish I could tell you it was, but scripturally it's just not. But there does come a point in which God wipes away all tears. And I have to believe, granted I'm limited by my human understanding, but I have to believe that when God wipes away all tears, with that goes every memory that could cause a tear. And all I have left in my mind are those things that honor God and bring me joy. I like that thought. I won't remember all the times I played the fool, acted stupid, failed him. It's all gone. And at some point, we don't remember the hard times anymore. By the way, he does that for us in some measure now, doesn't he? It's so strange. My dad and I didn't get along. You know that. We had a hard time. And yet now, the farther away I get from his passing, I find I have more good memories than bad. God just has a way of filtering all that for you, you know. So, friend, you may be weary. And if you're not, you're going to find yourself weary. And if you never feel weary, I would assert to you that something's not right. Because when you're in service to the Lord, you're going to have seasons of weariness. It's coming. What do? You work through those unanswered prayers and you offer unfiltered petitions. And you enjoy that unnatural peace. And that's what we get from a psalm for the weary believer.